Imagine it's 1996 and you're Nintendo. Your latest home console, the N64, has suffered from numerous delays and is releasing well behind the other 5th generation consoles. Developers are flocking to them and abandoning you, leaving third-party support for the console dire. What do? Enter Marigul Management, with Tetsu Kayama as its director. Created and jointly owned by Nintendo and HR company Recruit, Marigul would help support smaller studios with management and financing, letting the creators focus on actually making their games and getting them released for the N64. This was a boon to smaller developers who struggled with the rising costs of developing games going into this generation, and would obviously benefit Nintendo, who desperately needed more games. Though how much Marigul actually helped with that is debatable. Only 4 games came out from initial funding: Doshin the Giant, Custom Robo, Cubivore, and Hey You Pikachu. Already not a great number, and that's before pointing out that Cubivore got delayed and ended up releasing on GameCube, so realistically it's actually only 3 N64 games. While some of these studios would make more N64 games after, including those only bumps the number up to 5, and that's being generous because one of those is an expansion pack, not a standalone game. Needless to say, this wasn't the plan. There were more games being developed with support from Marigul that never saw the light of day, and today we're going to be looking at all of it. The games that came out, the games that got cancelled, and all the other weird stuff Marigul were up to, when Wikipedia says they only helped make games for the N64, they're being sold incredibly short. From Nintendo Power, the distribution platform that let users download Super Famicom and Game Boy games onto special cartridges, to strange peripherals that never came out, like one that let the Game Boy Color connect to a Dreamcast. And, maybe weirdest of all, how they helped fund games for the PlayStation, Dreamcast, and PS2. We have a lot to cover in this episode, so let's dive straight in and start with the N64 Marigul games that actually came out. The first game I want to talk about is Doshin the Giant, and very quickly, this video is actually the 3rd part in a series all about Doshin, but don't worry if you haven't seen them. I am still covering the game here, so you can just consider those videos extra watching if you want to learn more after. Developed by Param and released in 1999 as a launch title for the 64DD, a disc-based add-on for the Nintendo 64 which was a colossal failure, Doshin is like the one good thing that came from it, essentially becoming its mascot. It's a great showcase of the DD's rewritable discs, allowing for a more persistent, changeable world than would have been possible on a standard card. You can morph the landscape to your liking and create dozens of villages across its expansive map. It's impressive stuff despite the draw distance limitations. While that makes it sound quite complex, it's a very simple game with a streamlined experience and a satisfying gameplay loop, always breadcrumbing you towards what you should do next with villager requests and giving you something new to work on. Help out the villagers until their villages get big enough to build a monument in your honour. Build all of them to beat the game. While it's a pretty chill and simple game, I feel like it does go a bit too far in places with the 64DD's internal clock. It uses it to pass time even when you're not playing, but not one-to-one like in Animal Crossing. Days and weeks go by in a matter of hours, which can leave your island in an awful state that no amount of preparation before turning off the game could have saved you from. It's really disheartening to come back and seeing so much of your work undone by stuff you had no chance of stopping. That said, I still enjoyed playing it and do think it's a good game overall, even if it does have those annoyances. Despite everything it had going against it, you know, Being on the 64DD, it was still able to garner a dedicated fanbase, and was successful enough to warrant getting an expansion. Doshin the Giant, Tinkling Toddler Liberation Front Assemble is interesting. I think the simplest way to describe it would be that it adds achievements to the base game, but the achievements are the most monotonous, annoying things you could possibly think of. Stuff like jumping 200 times in a day, or picking up 25 trees. You load into the expansion, pick a task to work towards, do the task in the base game, and then are rewarded with a short animation upon completing it. That already sounds pretty tedious, but it's actually way worse than that due to the way the game is designed. Fulfilling just one task involves swapping discs between the base game and expansion 6 times, so you'll be changing disc over 100 times to beat the whole game. It would not be an understatement to say that this game makes you suffer, and the manual even outright says that's the entire point. So, mission accomplished, I guess. Digital torture, wrapped up in a bizarre narrative that you're a child in a dream, pissing on everything in it and wetting the bed if you play badly. I didn't care much for how this game plays, obviously, but I really like the vibes it has regardless. The music especially, I thought was really good. Finally, Doshin the Giant got a remake on GameCube, which irons out all of my misgivings with the original game, turning it into an incredibly relaxing experience. It's genuinely one of my favourite games of all time, if the hour-and-a-half long video I made gushing about it didn't make that obvious. These 3 games are all Param made before they closed down, so did Marigul do well in funding them? I mean, from my perspective, yeah, if only for GameCube Doshin, though realistically speaking, the original would have done absolutely nothing to help the N64 situation, being released on the incredibly poorly selling 64DD. But, I mean, can you imagine how much bigger of an embarrassment it would have been without them? Doshin is like the only thing people cared for about it. It was one of 2 launch games for the thing. Can you imagine if it only launched with 1 game? As dire as it would have been even worse without this big yellow guy on it, so from that perspective, it probably was worth it for Nintendo. When I started making this video, the only Marigul game I had played was Doshin the Giant, so I already knew I liked it. I'd never played any custom Robo game before, and knew nothing about what they actually were, but my ignorance of the series is absolutely criminal, because I think custom Robo is my favourite thing that I discovered when making this video. Developed by Noise and released in 1999, it only came out in Japan, but does have a fan translation nowadays, which I'm incredibly grateful for. Custom Robo feels like playing through episodes of an anime that doesn't exist, that would have been a tie-in to a real game that also doesn't exist, like Beyblade, Bakugan, Yu-Gi-Oh!, that kind of thing. The game revolves around the titular custom Robos, little mind-controlled robots that children fight each other with, and it's broken up into little episodic days with their own little storylines. It's really cute. You're the new kid in town, and get to hang out with your gang of stereotypical anime archetypes and fight in tournaments. Though my favourite thing about the game is how it links those battles together and chooses to tell its story. It's a pretty generic one, don't get me wrong, but I love how it's presented. It could have easily just been dialogue scenes between every fight, but instead it borrows the format of a JRPG, replacing the random battles with custom Robo battles. So you get all these adorable little dioramas of the town to explore and hang out in, running around and chatting to all the characters to see how their dialogue develops as the story goes on. The N64 had so few RPGs, so it makes it feel really novel to get to explore the world this way. And it's so well paced, the perfect amount of chill downtime between fights, which are pretty fun too. Think Virtual-On crossed with Armoured Core. Simple, easy to pick up and understand controls, but with enough variety in the amount of new parts you can customise your robot with to keep experimenting with them all engaging. Some enemies will try to get up close, others will bombard you from across the map. It always feels like there's something new you can try to counter an enemy, and experimenting is really easy. With a dedicated practice range you can always access and swap parts in, it's not cumbersome at all. Shout out the stupid ass sound effects this game has too, from the funny plopping of the robos running around, to whatever is going on with the main menu. Why does it sound like that? I had so much fun playing this game, it kinda made me mad that I've never tried the series before, but looking into it, it's pretty obvious why. Of its 5 games, 2 of them released in English, and only 1 of them in Europe. I would have been all over this as a kid, so it sucks it never got a chance to come out over here, though there were plans at one point to release it in the US. According to a GameSpot article from 2000, Marigul said that they were working to establish a company in the new year to get Marigul-related games released overseas, and that they hoped American players would see it as a Japanese version of Quake. So no idea what that's meant to mean. I don't think I need to point out how this game is nothing like Quake, but in any case, that plan obviously didn't pan out. The only N64 Marigul game to release overseas was Hey You Pikachu. Maybe they felt it didn't make sense to spend the extra time localizing custom Robo when the GameCube was coming out so soon, and instead opted to wait until that console's game for an overseas release. Either way, I'll definitely be returning to the series in the future to check them out properly. So yeah, I think another good pick from Marigul, spawning a successful, if not very long-running series, the final entry releasing on the DS in 2006. While noise apparently still exists, they don't seem to be doing a lot nowadays. Looks like they've been tied up with the free-to-play mobile game Dragon Quest of the Stars for the last decade, but with it closing down last year, maybe they'll be working on something new soon. Cubivore was developed by Sarugakucho, who had previously released Jungle Park for the Apple Pippin. You play as an oddly horny, cube-shaped animal, trying to become king of the Cubivores. Now, obviously the elephant in the room with this game is that it never came out on N64. It was originally being made for the 64DD, before moving to Kart, and then finally to GameCube. But the game was actually nearly complete before it jumped consoles, and in 2021, a prototype of the N64 version was dumped and released online. This version is fully playable from beginning to end, albeit a little buggy in places. It's fascinating being able to play both versions back to back to see where they differ, though for the most part, Cubivore is basically the same on both consoles. This isn't a Doshin the Giant situation, where the game was remade from scratch. Some animals got redesigned and given smoother edges, the level design differs in some places and is a bit more forgiving and generous with upgrades. The controls were improved so things like sprint and attack are no longer bound to the same button, and poor dear Marigul had their name stripped from the game's opening. Despite the technical improvements to the graphics though, I think it looks a bit nicer on N64. The lower resolution textures work better here, especially because they're allowed to be a bit more pixelated, whereas they're really blurry on GameCube a lot of the time. No matter what console though, I love how this game looks. Its commitment to having everything be abstract cubes, from tiny bugs just being 2 rectangles flapping together, to the sun being a picture of a red circle on all sides of a cube, it's really funny. As is the writing, which can be enjoyed in both versions because the English translation from the GameCube release can be patched into the prototype. I love how much absolute shit the little horny cube chats. I don't know if this makes any sense whatsoever, but this might be like the most PS1 coded N64 game I've ever played. Like, the stylish art style it goes for feels much more synonymous with that console. Honestly, just about the only thing I didn't like that much about Cubivore was actually playing it. It's a fun concept, starting as a single cube with one limb, which is of course just a rectangle, eating the limbs of other animals to absorb their colour. The colour of your limb decides the layout of them, which in turn decides your stats and how mobile you are. It's really playful. When you have offspring, your child will grow an extra limb, so you start the game as a pathetic little pig-headed worm, and slowly become more competent and able to defend yourself. It's kinda like the creature stage in Spore, I guess, except violence is the only way forward, which I think is my biggest hang-up of the game, because I don't like fighting things all that much. To a degree, that's kind of the point, like, look at you. You're gonna suck at fighting, but then the camera just ramps that up way too much. It's all over the place and not very cooperative, and the only way to really attack enemies is by locking onto them and lunging. So in every encounter, I felt like I was fighting the camera more than the animal I was actually fighting. It was just a little more frustrating than I was able to put up with, despite everything I did like about it. Though it was charming enough that it wouldn't surprise me if I did give it a second go sometime. The gameplay was opening up and letting me experiment with the different animal forms more, so it'd be cool to see where it goes with that. Sadly, this would be the last game Sarugakucho would make, and it obviously didn't do a whole lot to help the N64. Even on GameCube, it didn't do that great either. I genuinely have no idea why this game didn't get a European release. Normally it was us that got all the weird experimental games, but in this case the United States got it and we didn't. I think it could have had some sort of cult popularity over here, so it's a shame that never happened. Hey You Pikachu is the game I was least interested in checking out for this video, mainly because I had literally never heard anything good about it. It reviewed pretty middling when it came out, and nowadays people talk about it online as if it's literally unplayable. Well, after finally playing it for myself, while I don't think it's a game for me, I thought it was pretty cute. Developed by Umbrella, Hey You Pikachu was released in 1998. And according to the game's Japanese website, which is still up, believe it or not, was the first game released under Marigul. It uses a special microphone that Umbrella also developed for the N64 called the Vocal Recognition System, or if you're from the United States, Vocal Recognition Unit. Not quite sure what the point of that change was, but alright. Only 2 games ever came out that used it. This one, and Densha de Go 64. More games were in development to use it, some from Marigul as we will talk about later, but they either got cancelled or had the functionality removed for its final release. Using the microphone, you befriend a wild Pikachu by talking to them, give them commands, play with them, and generally just hang out and go on silly adventures together, with 256 different words Pikachu can understand, and many variations on phrases in case you forget the exact wording the game suggests. There's a lot you can tell Pikachu to do, and it was honestly kind of magical at times. Reminded me of playing Nintendogs as a kid and being in awe that it would know what I was saying. Despite what I had read online, it worked flawlessly for me. I don't think Pikachu misunderstood me once. I can only assume the voice recognition was worse using the actual peripheral, but nowadays on an emulator using a modern microphone, it worked great. Unsurprisingly, Pikachu is definitely the standout of this game. While the environments and other Pokemon look nice enough, the Pika is so expressive and well animated, even if their rig is a little freaky compared to how we'd expect them to look today. I mean that in a positive way though. It's fun seeing Pikachu make weird movements or faces, especially whenever their model gets all weird and stretched out, like, why are your legs so long? That said, while I enjoyed my time with the game more than I expected, especially once it opened up a little and actually let me look away from Pikachu. Like, genuinely, for the first few missions of the game, you cannot look anywhere else but where Pikachu is. I just don't think it's a game for me, and one that I'll keep playing. And that's fine, I didn't expect it to appeal to me, and I don't want you to misinterpret that as me commenting on its quality. I think the game has a bit of a bad rap nowadays, so if you think it'd interest you, don't let the negative sentiment online stop you from playing it. I think you'd have a good time if you tried it for yourself. For the rest of Umbrella's existence, with the exception of one mobile game, they only made Pokemon spin-offs like Rumble and Dash, until Creatures Inc. absorbed them in 2021. While maybe not the most beloved games in the series, they clearly did well to pick them to work on Pokemon if they were trusted to do it for over 2 decades. Well, I'm not quite sure how this group of fresh-faced graduates, and even current students of the University of Tokyo, got handed the keys to such an important property, even if only 2 years into its existence. They clearly had a vision for the game and the vocal recognition unit, so it's cool they had the opportunity to create it nonetheless, even if it went very underutilized for the rest of the console's library. So those were all the games that Marigul helped produce for the N64, and I'm not sure if this is a mean thing to say, but if you were Nintendo, you'd probably be pretty miffed, right? In fact, as I'll get onto later, I have very good reason to believe they were. The tiny amount of games they helped release would do very little to help the N64, especially if you're from Europe. We got literally nothing. But this wasn't meant to be all the N64 games that Marigul would release, and in my research I was able to find 7 more that were announced but never saw the light of day, including one I cannot believe I'd never heard of before until making this video. So let's check them all out and see what we missed out on. Echo Delta was a game being developed by Clever Trick. While a prototype is known to exist, after being sold on eBay for $1,500 in 2006, a ROM of it has never surfaced online. However, at some point that prototype was dumped, so while the ROM hasn't been released by whoever owns it, they did record some gameplay in an emulator and upload it to YouTube in 2012. With very nondescript titles and only a couple hundred views. It's crazy what is just on this website, waiting to be discovered. Echo Delta is a real-time strategy game where you play as a submarine, tasked with rescuing a larger sub that has gotten stuck on the ocean floor. You're tiny, and have very little means of defending yourself, aside from being able to ground pound. To rescue the submarine, you need to give it energy, which is mined by an energy core at the bottom of the playing field that you have to defend from enemies. You can use energy to upgrade the core, increasing how much it can mine, as well as to upgrade the turrets surrounding it, giving you more means of attacking enemies. You can also upgrade your sub with things like a better radar that clears more of the fog surrounding you. The demo looks pretty simple, with a lot of levels dedicated to just teaching the mechanics, but it seems like it could have evolved into a pretty interesting game, though sadly it wasn't meant to be, despite apparently being 90% complete during its public showing at Space World. That was in August of 2000 and it was due to come out in December, but for whatever reason the game was quietly cancelled. If there was any statement put out about why, I couldn't find one. It seems like it could have been delayed to February 2001, according to 64 Dream magazine, but considering this issue also came out in February, I'm not sure if that's actually reliable, or if they were just trying to will the game into existence. Still though, in a world where things like early builds of Ocarina of Time and Dinosaur Planet can find themselves online, hopefully one day the same will happen to Echo Delta, because I'd love to play it for myself. As for Clever Trick, it seems like this was the only game they developed. CatRoots is maybe the weirdest game here, because we literally know nothing about it. Not even Nintendo seemed to really know what it was. On display between Turok 3 and Resident Evil 0 during E3 2000, When asked by a journalist at IGN about what CatRoots was, a Nintendo of America rep simply said, "We were told to put it out there." An interview with Miyamoto sheds a little more light on the project though. He explained that it was originally in development by Marigul themselves, but Nintendo took the project over. It's a rather unique concept. I just don't know what kind of product it will finally be, but please look forward to the outcome. The game was never seen from ever again. So yeah, that's it, and even what they showed at E3 doesn't explain much. Featuring a Tom and Jerry-esque chase between a cat and a mouse, what was shown isn't even really gameplay. At best, they were in-game cutscenes, but it's more likely they were just pre-rendered concepts of what they wanted the game to be. Some outlets picked up that it didn't really look like an N64 game, and speculated it could have secretly been a game for the, as of then, unannounced GameCube. So it's impossible to say what the game would have been. Miyamoto didn't even seem to know what it would end up as. A short, non-playable demo just isn't enough to go by, even if places like the Lost Media Wiki tells you that it was playable. Look, I'm sorry, I don't know why this is becoming a recurring theme in my videos, calling out wikis that just make up shit for no reason, but it's worth bringing up because this page is one of the first results when you search for this game online. The two people they have listed who worked on the game are both unsourced, and while they've labelled this image as someone playing CatRoots, if you actually watch the episode of Electric Playground where this is from, you can see they're not even looking at the screen CatRoots is on. They're playing something on the screen next to it, which, because I brought it up earlier, we know is Turok free. They also speculate on the original developer of the game, putting together an article from Planet N 2000 on CatRoots, saying that it was copyright to a three-lettered company they couldn't remember the name of, and an interview from game developer with Matoyo Okamoto, who said he was an intern at a Marigul-funded studio called EnEn Entertainment, surmising they must be the same company, though there really is no way to verify if that's true or not. We only have parts of the trailer preserved, which doesn't include the game's copyright. Also, by the time of E3, Nintendo had already taken over the project, so I'm not even sure if EnEn's name would still be attached to it, even had they made it. There are no articles that talk about EnEn and CatRoots directly, though there are references to another three-lettered company that could be a contender, NCL, which is short for Nintendo Company Limited, so just Nintendo. That would track with Nintendo taking over the project, and IGN speculated it could have been an NCL game. Though again, I'm not entirely sure on this. I don't know why the copyright would say NCL rather than just Nintendo, but it's another possibility to consider either way. Sadly, CatRoots just didn't seem exciting enough for people to pay much attention to it at E3, often being glossed over by attendees to look at more interesting games. It was a pretty stacked showing that year, so I can hardly blame them, but like, IGN, you filmed like a minute of the CatRoots trailer. Would it have really killed you to have captured the entire thing? I really hope that one day in the future, someone interviewing Miyamoto will throw in a random question about CatRoots, but I'd honestly be shocked if he even remembers what it is. While I'm here, just to quickly rattle off EnEn Entertainment, I couldn't find any games they produced, so whatever Matoyo Okamoto was working on, it didn't release. Though he would later go on to work on Luigi's Mansion, was in charge of the minigame collections of the DS Mario games, and in 2019 was put in charge of the Silent Hill franchise, overseeing its revival and successful new releases, which is really cool, and a bizarre connection I didn't think could ever happen. Okay, so remember earlier when I said that custom Robo was my favourite thing I found when making this video? That was a lie. An elaborate ruse to lull you into a false sense of security. Like, damn, that custom Robo was pretty cool, but I guess nothing's gonna top that, huh? But get ready to have your socks blown off by my actual favourite thing I found when making this video. FinFin. Goddamn Fin, come and see him. Look at his dumb head, his dumb child, his epic dance moves. I love him. An incredibly cute 1996 PC game by Fujitsu, Fin on Teo the Magic Planet is a virtual pet game along the same lines as Hey You Pikachu, focused on Fin, a dolphin-bird hybrid. It's pretty simple, there's not actually a lot of ways to interact with him, but it's utterly charming nonetheless. I found myself leaving it on in the background just for the vibes. And at some point there was a 64DD version of the game in the works too, known as Teo 64. Apparently a collaboration between Fujitsu, Hudson and Marigul. The game would have used the vocal recognition unit, but apart from that, there's not a lot else known about it. Only a few screenshots of the game were ever shown off, showing Fin in glorious real-time 3D. Shout out Fin, I love Fin, and his incredibly dedicated fan community. Check out this website, packed to the gills with 90s web design goodness, archiving so much of his history, like the Teo Magic Planet anime, and the banger club anthems they made for him. Like, holy shit.
And now, get ready for your best friend. Here is Fin.
I also have to give a massive shout out to Jade Palace on Tumblr for compiling this great resource for playing it on modern PCs, with the game already installed on a virtual machine available for download. It also comes with a load of extra goodies like scans of stickers, mouse mats, and temporary tattoos. Imagine how fucking cool you'd look with one of them bad boys on you. If you want to learn more about Fin, I highly recommend checking these two sites out for yourself, as well as LGR's excellent video on it. Similar to the GameCube and its Game Boy Advance link cable, the 64DD was going to have its own way to connect to the original Game Boy, the 64GB cable. DT Bloodmaster was a trading card game similar to Yu-Gi-Oh! That would have taken advantage of it. It would have let you use the Game Boy as a second screen in multiplayer sessions to hide your cards from other players, and transfer cards between it and a Game Boy version of the game that was also in development. It was being made by Game Studio and produced by Masanobu Endo, the creator of Xevious. But DT had two things going against it, and you've probably already guessed both of them. The 64GB cable never came out, and it was going to be a 64DD game. Following the cancellation of RandNet, the 64DD's online service, which would have played a large role in the game, they announced on their website that the 64DD version of DT was cancelled, though they did seem to float the idea that they could release it for free for subscribers before its closure. That seems to imply that the game was near completion, though no screenshots of this version have ever come out, and as you might have guessed, they did not end up releasing it for free either. The Game Boy version lived on though, releasing in 2001 as DT Lords of Genomes, which itself would go on to get a port to Japanese mobile phones. I am very unequipped to play through it or tell you anything about it as someone who can't read Japanese, but I'm glad it got to exist in some capacity at least. As far as I could tell, these next two games were only ever mentioned once, in an interview in Weekly Famitsu magazine with Marigul director Tetsu Kayama, so I thought I'd bundle them together. VRS Racer was a racing game meant to utilise the VRS. Name kind of explains it all, except how it would have worked. How does controlling a car with your voice work? I don't know, they didn't say anything else except that it was in development. And then we have Toy, a game that apparently would have been about dolls. Again, that's it. Does a single sentence even count as a game? I'm not sure. Finally, again from this interview, was a game being considered by Capcom and Yoshiyuki Tomino, the creator of Gundam. It was meant to utilise the 64GB cable like DT Bloodmaster, but what I find most interesting about this game is how this is the first time I've ever heard about it. A game between the creator of Gundam and Capcom feels like it should be a much bigger deal, especially when you consider how little Capcom made for the N64. Had it come out, this would have been the 4th game they ever made for it, 5 if you count Resident Evil 0 before it moved to GameCube, and 2 of those were ports of PS1 games. But I could find out very little about this game, only this interview and a translated summary of Tomino's book Turn-A no Iyashi by Fees, the author behind Moon's Cocoon, an incredibly extensive and well-researched Gundam fansite. While the video game never materialised, Marigul was apparently instrumental in providing mental health support to Tomino during his hiatus from Gundam, and it was through this partnership with Capcom that he met Akiman, who would go on to become the character designer for Turn-A Gundam. So like, huh? That's crazy, right? Marigul may have been very bad at making N64 games, but they at least were able to help make one of the most beloved series in Gundam's history, so they have that going for them. Those are all the N64 games I could find that Marigul were involved with, and while some were obviously much further along than others, it sucks that more of them couldn't have come out. Had all of them released, that would have bumped up Marigul's total count of N64 games from 5 up to 12, which of course still wouldn't have made much of a dent in the N64's dire third-party library, but would have at least sounded a bit more respectable for a company whose entire point was supposedly to get games onto the N64. There's no definitive resource for Marigul online or anything, so there could be more games I missed, like maybe games that Marigul didn't necessarily fund, but still played a part in helping develop, such as Derby Stallion 64. Originally it was meant to use the 64GB cable, which is what made me consider checking the credits in the first place, and while Marigul's name doesn't show up, Sarugakucho does. Founded by ex-Nintendo employee Toru Hoshimoto, and named by Mother creator Shigesato Itoi, they were the quality control department of Marigul, providing debugging and quality assurance to games. Where it feels like every other company I talked about in this video has disappeared, Sarugakucho are still around, going independent from Marigul in 2001, and have since worked on games like Elden Ring, the Silent Hill 2 remake, and Nioh 3. Saying that every game they worked on is a Marigul game would be disingenuous, of course. Like, I don't think Animal Crossing for N64 counts as a Marigul game per se, but there is a connection. And another Marigul connection around this time is Media Factory, and a mysterious company I couldn't find any information about, Sirio Studio. Going back to that weekly Famitsu interview with Tetsu Kayama, he explains that Marigul wants to help creators make games, but because it's a joint venture with Nintendo, that makes it harder if the creator wanted to work on PlayStation. As a result, they created a new company called Sirio Studio to deal with games being created or published by Media Factory. That sounds strange, but zooming out a little, I think it does make sense. In an Iwata Asks interview from 2012, he explained that Marigul raised funds from investors, invested those funds into game studios, and then returned a portion of the profit back to those investors. If they were struggling to find smaller studios to make games for the N64 because they wanted to work on PlayStation, then finding a way to make that happen so they can continue to stay funded makes sense. As for why Media Factory specifically, well, it was also a subsidiary of Recruit, and Tetsu Kayama was director of both companies. So that solves that mystery pretty quickly. I imagine they had the freedom to do this because Marigul was only partly owned by Nintendo, but still it is rather strange to think that they are at least a little responsible for these games getting funding or development assistance. As for Sirio Studio, nothing comes up online if you search for them in either English or Japanese, and only one game I will get onto later ever refers to them, so it might be they were just an internal team at Marigul or something like that. Thankfully, finding the games that Marigul supported Media Factory with isn't hard to do, as this article, as well as this GameSpot translation of it that I used as a reference, announced all of them from what I could tell. So let's take a look and see what we discover. Though quickly, before we can look at some non-Nintendo consoles, we have a few Nintendo Media Factory stops to make first, starting with Columns for the Super Famicom. Yeah, the Sega puzzle franchise. There's all sorts of bizarre company crossovers happening here. I don't have a lot to say about it gameplay-wise, like, it's Columns, but the way it was released is very interesting. It was a game you could only download through Nintendo Power. Nintendo Power was a Marigul project that launched in 1997, headed by Masanobu Endo from Game Studio. It was conceived as a way of prolonging the sales of Super Famicom games at a time when the N64 was struggling. Using a special blank cartridge, you could go to any Lawson in Japan and use the Nintendo Power kiosk to download up to 8 games onto it, for way cheaper than it would cost to buy the game brand new. It's a fascinating piece of gaming history I knew nothing about, especially because of its longevity. It was still active at the same time as the Wii shopping channel, all the way up to 2007. If you want to learn more about it, I highly recommend the Did You Know Gaming video on it. It's really thorough and covers a lot of the exclusive games released for it that aren't relevant to this video. So getting back to Media Factory and Marigul, Columns wasn't the only game they helped produce. To quickly rattle through them, we have Okaki Logic 1 and 2, which are Picross games. There's also Tamagotchi Town, a game about developing a town for Tamagotchis to live in, if you can believe it. Finally, at least I think so from what I can find, there was a port of Wizardry 1, 2 and 3. Based on the Famicom game, which was originally developed by Game Studio again, this new version was handled by a studio called Gung Ho, with assistance from Marigul and Sarugakucho. Definitely the most interesting game of the bunch for me, though sadly not one I can properly appreciate because I suck ass at it. It is such a hard and evil game, so I think I gotta work my way up to playing it sometime, which I wanna try and do. It looks cool. Finally, for the Nintendo consoles, we have the Gameboy Color and Sakura Wars, one of Sega's biggest franchises once upon a time, which originally began on the Sega Saturn. They combine tactical turn-based battles with life sim and visual novel elements, where the decisions you make influence the story and your relationships with your teammates. And in 2000, between the release of 2 and 3, it got a Game Boy Color spin-off developed by Jupiter. It was a surprise announcement by Kayama in this Famitsu article, so surprising that even Sega were caught off guard by it. They had to release a statement shortly after, clarifying that while they had been approached by Kayama to release a Sakura Wars game on the Game Boy, Sega's prerequisite was that it would only happen if it could connect to a Dreamcast. If Kayama had made the announcement, he must be sure that it would be possible, and they looked forward to seeing his plans. Those plans never came to fruition, the peripheral never got made, but the game still came out, and there is leftover data in it that shows what it would have been. A peripheral you'd plug into the side of a Game Boy that would detect certain signals shown on screen in the first game's Dreamcast remake. If you want to know more, I highly recommend Matobi's video on the peripheral, as well as their broader video about Sakura's GB and what a weird little game it is. They are definitive videos on the game and go way more in depth about it all than I ever possibly could. Also, as you've probably seen throughout the video, they were also kind enough to send me some scans of the Famitsu article I've been referring to a lot, which were not available anywhere online from what I could tell. So thank you so much, it would have been very hard to make this video without them. Anyway, my thoughts on the game are pretty much worthless because it relies heavily on you having played the first game to fully understand it, which I hadn't done when I tried it for myself. Oops. I did check it out after though for footage, and enjoyed what I played if that's worth anything. In the credits, Marigul isn't listed, but Tetsu Kayama is there under executive producer, and so is Sarugakucho. Okay, so finally it's time to talk about some PlayStation games, and to find them I've been using this GameSpot article for translation, where either because of weird translation or using the games in development titles, their names don't quite match up with what they released as. This also goes for Tetsu Kayama himself, being referred to here, and in other articles, as Satoshi Kayama. Not quite sure what's going on there. I don't know Japanese, so I don't know if that's just a weird translation or what, but that made finding some of these games rather interesting to say the least. Not for this one though. Kero Kero King is just actually what the game is called. A prequel to Ribbit King, Kero Kero King was released on the PS1 in 2000. It's essentially a golf game, but with frogs instead of golf balls, creating a new sport called Frolf, or Kerof as it's known as here. It's oddly story heavy for a golf game, but I dig that. I love how this game looks, I love its fun gameplay, even if I got absolutely destroyed by the CPU. Launch the frog with a sound effect suspiciously similar to that of a Koopa shell in Super Mario World, and try to get it into the hole. I like the extra layer of chaos the frog adds to the game, like how it will jump to eat nearby flies, which can be good or bad for you depending on where they are, resulting in some crazy combos that can lead you to be miles away from where you actually landed. I liked it a lot, though I think if I do want to check it out properly, I'll be sticking with Ribbit King so I can actually understand the game, and hang out with the funny gay referee alien.
Oh, me? Why, I'm a referee! Anyway, your opponents are all waiting. Let's go kick off the Frolf Tournament Tour!
A referee? Are they always that creepy?
Seems like a really good party game. I think I'm gonna have to force some friends to play this with me. In the credits, we see both Sarugakucho listed under debugging and tuning, and Marigul Management as management. Sarugakucho would go on to do game tuning for Ribbit King as well, and because he's an inescapable presence apparently, the map design was done by Masanobu Endo. The next game from the article is called Angel, which ended up releasing as EnEn Angel, and I think this is the game that made me understand what Marigul were doing with the PS1. Like EnEn Angel and even Kero Kero Golf, they're just the most PlayStation-ass looking PlayStation games ever, right? Like, the type of game that looks and feels so PlayStation that it's impossible to imagine it ever existing on N64. The kind of game that's so niche and small that even the cost of producing the N64 cartridges would bankrupt the studio trying to make it. Having a division to make games for the PlayStation just suddenly makes so much sense. EnEn Angel is fun. Released in 2001 and developed by D-Crews, this game kinda melted my brain a little to begin with. Taking place on a small circular disc, I guess all discs are circular, your goal is to either kill all the enemies, or if you want a high score, change the colour of all the panels by walking over them. You can rotate each layer of the disc to move the tiles more in your favour, and change your speed to try and hit the tiles you want. It was very overwhelming at first, but after a while I got the hang of it, and it's cool. Maybe a little too repetitive for my liking, there's very little variety in the levels, but I could see myself coming back to it every now and then to chip away at slowly but surely. You can also use the points you earn to unlock toys that you find, getting silly little animations of the silly little guy playing with them. Very cute. In the credits, we see Sarugakucho again for testing, with Marigul in brackets next to it. Gourmet Frontier was a hard one to find, but looking at what games Media Factory released, I think the only thing that makes sense for it to be is Tenku no Restaurant, released for the PS1 by Cryotech. It's a party game based around a game board, and from what I was able to figure out, your goal is to move around the board collecting ingredients to try and make the best and most expensive meals. Once a meal is judged, that space will be marked, and whenever another player lands on it, they have to pay the price of that meal. Again though, game is entirely in Japanese, I can't say much more than that. It seems fine if you're into this kind of game, I guess. A year later, it got a crossover version with Hello Project, a Japanese idol collective, which seems to be the version of the game that is most well known, and the one I was able to find the credits for. Sarugakucho once again makes an appearance here. Okay, David? What the hell is David for PS1? I looked at every game Media Factory published, and there was nothing remotely close to David, so either it never came out, or this is somehow referring to The Spirit Hour, Kazoku Ikeda's Psychic Laboratory, the only other PS1 game that Media Factory released that I can find. And oh my god, check this shit out. David or not, this game is awesome and I have to talk about it. Based on the work of rock musician turned ghost hunter Kazoku Ikeda, you're sent in to investigate a spooky house with mysterious spooky things happening inside. Slowly mooching around, it controls like Kingsfield, but with point-and-click elements, as you poke and prod anything and everything that looks interesting and oh my god, look at this menu, holy shit. This game has an incredibly extensive encyclopedia on all sorts of paranormal topics, and while one isn't available yet, an English translation is in the works, and I will absolutely be coming back to check it out when it's ready. I played the game for like 15 minutes, it had great atmosphere, great scares, I had to stop myself from playing more because I want to be able to fully appreciate it. But like, okay, is it David though? Like, surely the name couldn't have been that far off. The fact that Media Factory published it just has to be a coincidence. I mean, it's not like if you looked at the back of the game's box where it showed who made it that you'd see Marigul's name or anything. Oh, okay, yeah. So, I'll be real, I started looking into this game just because I thought it looked cool. I didn't actually think I would find a Marigul connection here, but I am so happy to be proven wrong. Is this David? I do not know, but it is another Marigul game. I thought I'd have the same thing happen with the only Dreamcast game on this list too, Devil. The only two games on the system with Devil in the name are both from Ubisoft, so it's not those. And the only game Media Factory released for the Dreamcast was Culdcept 2, a sequel to a Sega Saturn game, so surely already being part of an established franchise, they would have just used that name. I thought to myself, looking up the box art anyway, and sure enough, Omayasoft, supported by Marigul. Originally released on Dreamcast in 2001, the game got a PS2 port and a United States release 2 years later, which is what I played here, so I actually knew what I was doing. It's basically Monopoly crossed with a deck builder. If you land on a space, you can summon a monster and claim it as yours, and then if another player lands there, they can either take the L and pay the rent they owe you, or choose to fight the monster, stealing the space from you if they win. I had never heard of this series in my life before making this video, but I really enjoyed it, especially all of the incredible faces it has. Some of the greatest the game industry has ever seen. So many good faces. This game got its hooks into me, which I was not expecting because I've never played a deck builder before in my life, unless Lost Kingdoms and Balatro count. Vote now in the comments if they do. Of all the games I had to play for this video, this is the one that I've kept playing in my free time. I've been having a blast with it, even if the luck aspect of the game does drive me mental at times. You gotta have patience for it and go into it with the right mindset, because being kinda like Monopoly, Even at the start of the game, these battles are hitting over 40 minutes long, which makes it incredibly devastating if you lose. It's starting to click though. I'm slowly learning to change my strategy as I play, adjusting to the luck that I get, and it felt incredibly satisfying to use the cards in my favour to fleece my opponent for over 1,000 gold in one turn. I will definitely be keeping an eye on this series in the future, which is convenient because I apparently picked the best time to randomly stumble into it. Both a port of the original Culdcept, the first time it's released in English, and the first brand new game in the series in a decade are both coming out this month. Depending on how long it took me to make this video, they might already be out by the time you're watching this. Like, what are the odds? If you're wondering, by the way, why Satoru Iwata was talking about Marigul in 2012, Culdcept is why, talking about a then upcoming entry in the series for 3DS. Anyway, both Marigul and Sarugakucho appear in the credits. In the original Dreamcast version anyway, Marigul was removed from PS2. The article implies this next game was meant for Dreamcast, but it actually ended up releasing for the PS2 in 2001. Gofungo no Sekai, 5 Minutes from Nowhere, is a visual novel based on the 1994 non-visual novel The World in 5 Minutes from Now by Ryu Murakami. It follows the protagonist as they accidentally stumble into a parallel world 5 minutes into the future from where they entered, where Japan didn't surrender in World War II. War continued to ravage the country until the population dwindled to only around 250,000 people living underground. It sounds really interesting and is apparently a great book, but both the book and this game have never been translated into English, so I can't tell you much more about it than that, or how accurate a retelling the game is. There is a full playthrough on Japanese YouTube though, if you were interested in looking into it more for yourself. This is the only game where I was able to find Sirio Studio mentioned in the credits. So those were all the games that were brought up in this article, but I doubt it's a complete list of everything Marigul were up to. Media Factory had 2 other Dreamcast games in development that never came out, called Alex Virus Composer and Alexander Road to Persia. Not quite sure what's up with the Alex theme, but it's likely they could have also had help from Marigul. There also seems to be another PS1 game that wasn't mentioned in this Famitsu interview, but, and take a look at this incredible chain of reporting, I was able to find mentioned in a time extension article that was originally posted on Nintendo Life, talking about an interview with Yasuho Nakajima, which was originally published in the book The Untold History of Japanese Game Developers Volume 3. In it, Nakajima talks about an RTS game they were working on for the PlayStation which never released, which Marigul was involved with. I can't find anything else about this game, so I have to assume it was going to be published by Media Factory like everything else we covered, but if not, then there could be other Marigul games out there that I wouldn't even begin to know where to start searching for them. So what happened to Marigul? Well, they closed down in 2003, and according to that Iwata Asks interview, several members of staff went on to form Jamworks, who would go on to work on Rivet King, and eventually with Omayosoft on the 3DS installments of Culdcept. As for its director, Tetsu Kayama, thanks to an investor relations document from 2000, we know he would step down from his position at Marigul and Media Factory to join Sega, eventually becoming their chief operating officer. At Sega, he would continue to work on games with credits on Jet Set Radio Future, Phantasy Star Online and Sonic Adventure 2, just to name a few. But get this, at one point he was actually in line to become the president of Sega, but the role instead ended up going to Hideki Sato. And according to Sato in his book about his time at Sega, he believes the reason he got the job over Kayama was because of how Kayama had acted disloyally to Nintendo during his time at Marigul Management and had basically pissed them off. This was when Sega was moving away from hardware to become a software publisher, so they couldn't have someone that Nintendo disliked as president. And Oh my god, I wish I could find out more about this. That entire sentence makes me want to speculate so much. Like, it totally makes sense that Nintendo would have felt like they got a shit deal out of Marigul, considering they literally got more games out on the PS1 than the N64. But the fact that Sato believes it cost Kayama a job as President of Sega is mind-boggling to me. How different would Sega be today had Marigul actually locked in and done their job better? How has this company that barely anyone has heard of had so much influence across so many things? I can't get a copy of the book for myself, and it would be useless to me even if I could. So please, if someone is watching this and can get it, please read it. It's on page 160. I need to know the whole gossip. At times I felt like I was going crazy doing research for this video. I found out so many things that felt like they should have been bigger news. A Capcom N64 game I'd never heard anyone talk about, a way for the Dreamcast to link to a Game Boy, Nintendo indirectly funding several PlayStation games. It's all so cool and interesting, and I can't believe I only discovered it by mistake because I wanted to replay Doshin the Giant and fell down a rabbit hole. I've definitely only began to scratch the surface of everything Marigul did, but I think this is the limit of what I feel comfortable covering in this video. There's absolutely more to find in the depths of old Japanese magazines and websites, but as someone who can't speak Japanese, I don't feel like I can do that research justice, or feel comfortable presenting what I would find, having to interpret it through a rough Google translation. While I've had some help from friends to translate some parts properly, there's just so much to do they couldn't possibly do it all. I don't want to risk spreading any misinformation, so I'll have to draw the line here. You can probably tell that I was not expecting any of this. When making that Doshin the Giant video, I learned about Marigul, saw the 8 games Wikipedia had listed, looked into them a little and thought, you know, that's interesting, but too much to cover in this video, but I'll definitely come back to that later down the line. And now here I am, down the line, and stumbled into way more games than I possibly could have imagined. 8 games very quickly became over 20, and I still didn't even cover everything I found. Had I known that Marigul was such a large company, I probably wouldn't have endeavoured to talk about them. I'm definitely not the right person to be trying to delve into any of this, but I already set myself up in part 1, so hope I've done a pretty reasonable job of showing what I did find, and that what is here was interesting and maybe inspires other people more suited to doing so to go out there and find out more about this company, because I feel like our current understanding of what they did is incredibly limited. So, in conclusion, I can totally get why Nintendo would have been disappointed in Marigul Management. Despite their great work elsewhere, for Nintendo they probably achieved very little, just a handful of new N64 games. Obviously, no amount of work Marigul could have done would have ever bridged the gap between the N64 and PlayStation, and that was never what they were expected to do. It would be silly to suggest that, but they were probably expected to do more than 3 games. They released more games for the PS1 and nearly as many for the Dreamcast and PS2. Despite that, I'm glad that they were set up and got to assist in the development of so many games that otherwise may have never gotten made. Their presence may have not been great for Nintendo specifically, but they seemed to really care about the industry as a whole and the creators within it, and genuinely wanted to create a healthier environment for them to thrive in. And their legacy lives on in so many different ways. This video has been an incredibly humbling experience, I think. A great reminder of just how many games are out there. I genuinely do not think I will ever run out of new rabbit holes to fall down, new series to obsess over and get into, and that is such a cool feeling. There's always something new to discover, and I hope this video launches you into some of your own personal rabbit holes too. Thank you for watching.